do that. And I think I found that in Kansas City with Jason Kander today. So I wanted to share that with you. We just love to say thank you to everyone in this community who reached out to the people of El Paso, Texas after the shooting on August 3rd. If you have seen me at a town hall before, you know that you cannot shut me up about El Paso, Texas. It's the city in which I was raised. The city, El Paso? I met somebody else who was a classmate of mine at El Paso High when I walked in. So look out, Iowa, we're taking over. So, and if you've heard me talk about El Paso, and you all know this from firsthand perspective, it's just really an extraordinary, beautiful community. And you cannot talk about El Paso without talking about Ciudad Juarez, our sister city, to whom we are joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River. There are 3 million of us from 2 countries living in Chihuahua and Texas, speaking 2 languages with 2 histories, 2 cultures, joined, connected, forming something far greater than the sum of our parts or the number of people involved. 3 million in this little river valley in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, hundreds of miles away from the other centers of power and population, kind of growing up and rising together, depending on one another, not seeing the differences politically or nationally or otherwise. A quarter of those with whom I live in El Paso were born in another country, and they chose us. They left their hometown, their home country, their family, to start again as strangers in a strange land, to do better for themselves and for their kids, just like your parents did, just like I want to do for my kids, just like any human being would do for theirs. But they were also, we got to remember this, called to do better for all of us. They were inspired by America and by the idea of America. Langston Hughes said, "The land that never has been yet, and yet must be." This more perfect union that we have never formed, this ideal that we are all created equal, that we have never really fulfilled, and yet to which each of us, I hope, still aspire. That's what brings the people of the planet to our shores and made us the greatest country on the face of that planet. And what makes El Paso, Texas so special, we are one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And I tell folks, that is not despite, it is because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over. We are 80 to 85% Mexican American just within the city limits of El Paso. If you took the metro area that includes Ciudad Juarez of nearly 1.5 million, you can do the math. We get pretty close to 100%. So beautiful, so exceptional, so magical. A place that I'm in love with, a place that created me, a place that I'm so proud to be raising our kiddos in. And yet what we realized on August 3rd is no matter how special you are, no matter how distant you are geographically from the rest of the country, we are still all connected. Martin Luther King told us that we are caught in this inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And that came home for us on August 3rd, because though we are a very safe community, and though we do not see our differences as disqualifying or dangerous, in fact, we embrace them as foundational to our success, our strength, and yes, our safety. We live in a very violent country. Nearly 40,000 gun deaths a year in the United States of America. No other developed country comes even close to this level of bloodshed that we accept functionally, politically, by any measure that you can cut in this country. And we are also, unfortunately, a country that is defined as much by our aspirations to realize that idea of America as by the racism that is foundational to this country. The greatness that was built starting 400 years ago, almost to the day, on the backs of those who were kidnapped, brought here in the Middle Passage, and through the whip, chains, and being sold and separated and treated in the most humiliating way, tortured beyond our imagination to comprehend today in 2019. built the wealth, built the greatness of this country, that their descendants would meaningfully, for hundreds of years thereafter, be locked out from enjoying or in any meaningful way participating in. That's also the United States of America. And we took some comfort, and it was cold comfort for people who do not look like I do, that the presidents of the United States of America were trying to realize that ideal. We're trying to live up to those words until this president of the United States of America, in his maiden speech, descending that escalator in the Trump Tower, defining Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, though they commit crimes at a far lower rate than those who were born in this country. Repeatedly warning of invasions from Guatemala, from Honduras, from El Salvador, literally sending more than 5,000 U.S. service members to the U.S.-Mexico border. To meet what? Kids who traveled 2,000 miles, fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, fleeing droughts that you and I had a role in creating, droughts caused not by God or by Mother Nature, but by climate change, our own emissions and excesses and inaction in the face of that. And they're coming here to this country of asylum seekers and refugees seeking shelter. And whether it is the U.S. service members, whether it's the Border Patrol, whether it's a wall, whether it's the cages that we put those kids in, or the fact that you and I, because in a democracy, we're the government, and we can take no satisfaction or superiority in blaming this on one person, though he shoulders a lot of it. Every day this happens, it's on all of us. 7 kids whose lives were lost in our care, in our custody, in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. How do we do this? We have a president who calls them animals, that's what he said, who calls them an infestation, which is what you might call a cockroach. Or if you're referring to a human being, you did it during the Third Reich in the 1930s and 40s. You didn't do it in the United States of America in 2018 and 2019. He talks about predators. He talks about killers. And he says it over and over and over again. A key to the success of propaganda in fascist dictatorships, not in a great republic or a democracy like ours. And then this year, in May, in Florida, one of these big rallies, when he's talking about this invasion and these immigrants who are coming to get us, he asks the crowd, how do we stop them? And someone yells back, shoot them. And the crowd literally roars their assent. And President Trump, the President of the United States of America, smiles and laughs his consent. And so when someone travels 600 miles from Allen, Texas, to El Paso, Texas, with an AK-47, a weapon designed for war, a weapon designed to kill people on a battlefield as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a number as possible, something that is so bizarre when you sit down and think about it, so bizarre to the killer's mother that when that weapon came in, she called the police in Allen, Texas, and said, what in the hell does my son need with an AK-47? He's not in the military, he's never been trained in it, doesn't need it to hunt, doesn't need it for self-protection. And the police just said, I'm sorry, man, perfectly legal to do that. Nothing we can do to help you. Well, he brought that weapon of war, which he could legally purchase in this country, and he brought that hatred, he brought that racism, and he brought the message that Donald Trump has been delivering the last 3 years. In the manifesto that he published, he warned of an invasion. He used the talking points from Fox News, fear of a replacement, Hispanics coming to Texas to overwhelm us in our politics and our democracy at the polls, in the voting booth, and who will represent us going forward. And then in a Walmart in my hometown, he opened fire and killed 22 human beings, grievously injured dozens more, and put a target on the back of Hispanics throughout this country. Just outside the memorial, outside of the Walmart, a young woman came up to me, and she reintroduced herself because she had played for an event of ours before. She has a mariachi band, Mariachi Femenil Flores Mexicanas. And I said, tell me how the band is doing, tell me how the bandmates are doing, what's going on? What has got you so shaken right now beyond what has happened in our community? And she said, I feel like they're going to come after me. I'm no longer willing to play in public. Mariachi is so symbolic of Mexican culture, Hispanic pride. We feel like we're a target when we're out in public. That event had changed her in some way. And I reminded her the killer did not come from our community. This is not who we are in El Paso. Nonetheless, I think she's got something when she's afraid, something that is consistent with what she's been hearing and seeing in this country right now. I want to say this one more thing about El Paso. As horrific as that act of terror was, the way that the community responded, the surgeons, the nurses, the custodial staff at the two hospitals to which the patients were brought, was nothing short of heroic. So many lives that they were able to save. The thousands of El Pasoans who donated blood, lines wrapped around the block under a broiling sun in the Chihuahuan desert, made me proud. A man who published a funeral notice saying that he and his wife had just moved to El Paso, did not have friends, did not have family, didn't know anybody. His wife was killed in that Walmart shooting, and he wanted to open the funeral to the public because he didn't expect anyone to come. Last Friday, my wife Amy, as we're driving from Jackson, Mississippi to Little Rock, Arkansas, she's in El Paso at the funeral, sends me a picture from her place in line trying to get into the church where the funeral is held. She waited 4 hours. The lines wrapped around the blocks many times over. First hundreds, then thousands of people coming out to be with this man in his grief. At this vulnerable, desperate moment in his life, we were together. I'd like to think that's how El Paso will be remembered, not for the terror attack, but how we came together. I'd like to think that offers an example and a key for this country going forward. Because these attacks on some people in this country have not stopped. After I was in El Paso, I went to Jackson, Mississippi. From there, I drove to a small town, Canton. And in that town and in Forest, Mississippi, nearly 700 people were picked up by ICE agents in the largest single-state ICE raid in the history of this country. Now, these are folks who have been in the United States of America from Guatemala for 10, 15, 20 years. Polleros, working in the chicken processing plants, one of the toughest jobs available to our fellow Americans. And they traveled 2,000 miles to come here for the privilege of working and make it $8, $10. If they've been there for a long time, $12 an hour to do that. Committing no crimes, perpetrating no violence, posing no threat to this country. Hundreds of agents swooped in, helicopters overhead, people tied by the wrists, by the ankles, hog-tied ankles and wrists together. And right now, at last count, 400 people still detained. And yet again, in the face of that adversity, some of the best of us in America stepping forward. We went to a Catholic church in Forest, Mississippi. Fathers and sisters, priests and nuns, attorneys working pro bono absolutely for free, trying to help these families out. We met a father whose wife is being detained. In his arms is their 4-month-old daughter, who is inconsolable right now. The mother, her breasts swollen, in pain, she was still breastfeeding. Depressed as a human being can be, I can only imagine. Unable to post bond because she somehow poses such a threat or a risk to this country that we cannot free her to work the job in the chicken processing plant and to raise her U.S. citizen child. I say all of this because we cannot act like these are acts of nature or this is our fate or our lot as a country.
The owner of that plant, the owners are very big Republican donors. They spend millions of dollars in campaigns, and yet they cannot get work permit to these people.
That's right. This is also a story about who has access in our democracy, who can purchase influence and outcomes as well. But I also want... The owners were not charged, not arrested. The next day, they are posting help wanted notices to try to hire replacement workers. We met with some of those workers who were too afraid to go in and pick up their paychecks for the $8 an hour that they earned, who will not be able to meet the rent payment in just a little more than 10 days, who cannot afford attorneys for their families. But let me make this point, please. I've heard people, including your junior senator, talk about gun violence as a mental health issue in this country. This is the logic. Crazy people do this stuff, so that's just crazy, and you just gotta accept it. How do you stop crazy in this country? which is demeaning to those who have mental health challenges, who need help right now, which is vilifying the absolute defenseless in the United States of America, and is turning a blind eye that we sell these weapons of war, that there are 329 million Americans and 390 million guns on the street. That this is a human cause problem with a human solution, like not only universal background checks and red flag laws and ending the sales of weapons of war, but picking up those weapons of war, the millions that are on the streets right now, so they cannot be used against us. We can also acknowledge that as evil as that act on August 3rd was, we cannot leave that as the sole definition of what happened or why it happened. I already told you about the language the president used, an invitation not only to hate, but to use violence. And the facts are out there. A rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years in this country. The day he signs his order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, is burned to the ground. This president is helping to cause it. He is not the only sole cause of it. This is foundational to our country, but he's inviting it out into the open with tragic consequences for all of us. His own director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, has warned Congress that the majority of domestic terror cases that they're investigating right now are cases of white supremacy. So as president, we've got to make sure that we make our #1 law enforcement priority combating white nationalism and white supremacy in this country. And the consequence of this hatred and this racism, and connecting the dots for our fellow Americans. Y además, when it comes to immigrants who have been perpetually kept down, and not just a second class of citizenship, no citizenship at all, their immigration status used against them by these employers as leverage to reduce their pay or not pay them or harass them with complete impunity. The best answer is not only to stop these ICE workplace raids, but to legalize the people who are here, free every dreamer from being here, for a path to citizenship, and then make sure that if you're coming from Guatemala or El Salvador or Mexico or the Philippines or anywhere, there is a legal, safe, fast path to join your family, to work a job, to go to school right here, to contribute to the greatness of this country. I think that's the best possible answer to the hatred that's been focused and directed against immigrants in this country. And let me conclude with this. Where does this hatred come from, and how does it find a home in our fellow Americans? If we fail to make progress on the human dignity of our fellow Americans, if you cannot count on the ability to afford your prescription medication, or take your child to a therapist, or go to a world-class public school like you have here in Des Moines, if you work not 1, but 2 or 3 jobs, you may be a school teacher in one of those schools who's not paid enough and has to work a second or a third job. If you cannot take time off to take care of your family or to take care of yourself, if you are paid a fraction of what a man is paid in this country, Latinas 63 cents on the dollar, women of color a little bit more, but not much, then we're failing people. And we provide fertile ground for the kind of demagogues who will focus the rage and anger that people justifiably have, not at their government, not at Donald Trump, but at the vulnerable, at the defenseless, at immigrants, at people who they warn are invading this country. So on every single one of those issues, from the economy to healthcare to immigration to confronting climate change before it is too late, it is not enough only to campaign on those issues. We've got to be able to deliver once in office. And that means universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care. That means $15 an hour as the floor for a minimum wage in this country. That means paid family leave. That means funding for world-class public schools beginning in pre-K universally and ensuring everyone can afford college or afford to join a those who would try to find scapegoats, people like Donald Trump, will not be successful. I am confident that that is the way to beat him. I am confident that once in office, that's the way to keep Donald Trump or anyone like him from ever appearing on the national scene again. We've got our work cut out for us. Let's get after it and go do it. Thank you all. If anyone has a question, a comment, a suggestion, an idea, would love to hear from you. She'll bring the microphone over to you.
All right, I see my first person. I'm running to you.
Yeah, Beto!
There we go.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I'm here because of climate change. You mentioned it twice. I think it hangs like a specter over everything you just said. Every problem you discussed is going to be made worse by climate change. I feel like you guys aren't taking it seriously enough. You're not talking about it enough. I feel like you're not scared enough. So I know I'm supposed to put this like a question. Have you heard of the Great Dying?
No, tell me.
Okay, well, the end of the Permian, this is millions of years ago, there's a sudden release of greenhouse gases. It killed everything. 95% of life snapped out like that. Now, no one's talking about the Arctic methane. I haven't heard anyone talk about that at all. That's why climate change is scary. It's scary because there are 1,500 gigatons. That's billion tons of methane sitting in the Arctic right now, frozen. We're having this conversation because it hasn't melted, but it's starting to. Now, I would really like people to start phrasing this problem in that context. This is life and death. I have 2 small children. If we don't fix this, there is no future. That's what the science says. They also say we have to do something now. When they say 10 years from now, they mean we have to have a solution in place. If we are going to start doing something, it's right now. Okay, so, I mean, I'm asking you, I'm begging you. Okay, 15 minutes to the next debate for climate change is not enough time. The top 5 issues you guys have are all climate change. That's all I gotta say, man.
Thank you. Well said. She's got the microphone right there.
Hi, my name's Emily Harris, and in February I'll be caucusing for kids. I'm a recent graduate of this university, and I'm also a young mother. My biggest struggle while in college was making sure that my child was insured because I couldn't work a full-time job and be a full-time student. She was then placed on Medicaid, which I'm sure you understand in Iowa is going through some massive changes, and I did not have the time as a full-time student to make sure that she was not losing coverage every single time a Medicaid provider dropped out of this state. So I was wondering, as president, what are you planning to do to make sure federally children are insured?
Thank you for sharing your personal story to bring everyone's attention to this issue. As I mentioned earlier, you should never have to worry about what it will take or what it will cost to be able to take your child to a therapist or afford a medication or make sure that they get their shots or just make sure that they're well enough to learn on the first day of 2nd grade. I want them focused on listening to their teacher and doing well and meeting their new friends, and yet that's the reality for far too many of our fellow Americans. Tens of millions who literally do not have insurance. Complicated in some states like Iowa where we privatized Medicaid. We made it harder, especially in rural communities, for rural clinics and hospitals to stay open. We just learned of another one discontinuing some levels of care here in Iowa this last week. The solution to this has to be universal guaranteed high quality care. My path to get us there is to ensure that everyone who is not cared for now enrolls in Medicare. Everyone who is insufficiently cared for, who is trying to navigate that bureaucracy, who cannot afford their premiums or co-pays, can enroll in Medicare if they choose. And those who have employer-sponsored insurance that they like because it works for them, members of unions who fought for that health care plan, maybe in lieu of a wage increase, they can keep that. And so you get to universal while preserving choice. You roll Medicaid into Medicare. You roll the Children's Health Insurance Program into Medicare, a program that is incredibly effective at a very low cost overhead to the American people, where we just focus on making sure that your kid is well enough to live to their full potential. That's my plan. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Mr. Rowe. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you talk about having universal health care, providing free college, also increasing personnel at the border. My question to you is, how are you going to pay for all of this? When we have national debt up to $22 trillion, that's, to me, that's something concerning, especially for myself as a younger generation who will probably have to deal with this issue. How is your administration going to deal with this?
Yeah. Thanks for asking the question. It begs another question. How did we get to $22 trillion in debt, right? You had 2 unpaid for tax cuts during the George W. Bush administration. You have wars that in Afghanistan are in their 18th year, in Iraq are functionally in their 28th year, but have metastasized to have a presence in Syria, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Libya, in so many other countries around the world without definition of victory, without a strategy, without an end in sight. That's added trillions of dollars to the debt. A $2 trillion tax cut under President Trump, the vast majority of whose benefits flow to the very wealthiest and the corporations that were already sitting on record piles of cash. And then the greatest recession since the Great Depression and the bailout that ensued, that all totals to about $22 trillion in debt. We have the resources to make investments in people and in communities and in our lives. And when we do so, we produce a return unlike these wars or unlike these tax cuts that is far and away greater than the initial cost involved. For example, extending all education to pre-K universally throughout this country produces a 6-to-1 return. Every dollar we put in, we get $6 back out. When people are well enough to go to work, to go to school, to teach, our economy is doing even better than it's doing right now. But your question is probably not in the long-term return, but how do we pay for it up front? If we taxed, for example, capital at the same rate that we tax ordinary income or wage income, hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If we roll back some of the worst of the Trump tax cuts, so we took a corporate rate from 35% to 21%, take that back up, not all the way, but to 28%, hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If we did a better job of taxing inherited wealth, we consciously, 243 years ago, didn't want to have princes and princesses and dukes and fiefdoms, and yet we do in America today. It's inimical not only to economic democracy, but political democracy. So we tax it both for the revenue and also to bring us all a little bit closer to one another in our experiences and our opportunities in this country. We have the resources to pay for all of the programs that we just described and more, and then also, y además, to produce a return on that investment that will ensure the long-term sustainability of this country and our economy. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for running for president.
Thank you.
I think I could speak for everybody here that our hearts are with El Paso.
Thank you.
I want to get into your character a little bit. We all know that Trump is a bull. We all witnessed during the debates with Hillary how he stood up and walked around behind her and tried to intimidate her, which he did. I want to know, you're on the stage with him debating, and he stands up and walks around and starts looking over your shoulder. How do you react?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. We stand tall. We stand proud of who we are. Here he is trying to intimidate people on lines of race or religion, saying that our differences somehow disqualify us as being Americans. Being fiercely proud of who I am and where I'm from and who we are as a country, I want that to come through on that debate stage, come through against Donald Trump. When he came to our community in the wake of this shooting, adding insult to injury, people stopped me on the streets. They said, why in the world would this guy who hates us, who invited this killer functionally to come to this community, now show up? Not a single person at the 2 hospitals that were caring for the victims, none of those patients came to see him when he showed up to our community. That doesn't tell you something. So, making sure that I reflect that fierce pride that I have in my community and continue to do the work that we started here tonight of connecting the dots, ensuring that you understand how Donald Trump has been terrible for this country, not just in the lives lost, in the economic losses that we're seeing here in Iowa, in the tariffs and trade wars that are costing us our farms and the next generation's ability to prosper in this state, in the steel jobs that we just found out about today that we lost despite the promises that he made, the consequence in Lordstown, Ohio at that GM plant, when as a candidate he promised them that they could buy that second home, that those jobs are not going anywhere, to lay out clearly and concisely for the American people the cost and consequence of Donald Trump. That will be my job on that debate stage. Thanks for asking the question.
Hi, my roommate Anna and I are starting at Grinnell College on Friday. Do you have any advice for us?
Yeah, the short advice is do not do what I did when I was in college. First of all, congratulations, and that's got to be really exciting. For me in college, extraordinary professors, reading amazing books, but the real education was in the people that I got to be with and who I learned from, who came from all over the country and really all over the world. Got to study in New York City, which is also an immigrant city like El Paso, and frankly, today, like Des Moines, where we got to celebrate our differences. And that was so exciting to me. If you have not had a beer yet, that's amazing. 18 to 21, that was like it was when I was in college. Have a lot of fun. Take it in. Be kind to other people and expect them to be kind to you.
Hi, my name's Chris. I just wanted to know your stance on an issue that has impacted the lives of many people in the United States, and that is the legalization of marijuana. It was deemed illegal for racial reasons to begin with, and then legalized from 68 to 72. And then they found some doctors that said that it wasn't so good for you. And now with the problems of heroin, fentanyl, and other opioids, where are we going to head in the future to combat these issues with natural medicines such as marijuana, peyote, and many other?
Thanks for the question. There's an interesting El Paso connection to this. More than 100 years ago, there was this sensational murder, just one person killed in El Paso, who was thought to be murdered by what back then was called a Mexican. But could have been a Mexican American. That's how all Hispanics were referred to more than 100 years ago in our country, unfortunately. And the headline was something like Mexican high on marijuana murders an American. And it was connected forever after in the minds of the American public with Hispanic culture and the danger of something that Donald Trump is bringing back again, this different culture, these different people who are coming to this country. Now we know that marijuana will not cause you to kill. It's not something you can overdose from or die from. It's not a smart thing to use if you're a young person when your brain is still developing. I think the science is pretty clear on that. But it can help you in your recovery. I hear from veterans from PTSD, in symptoms from traumatic brain injury. I talk to people who have fibromyalgia, a very painful condition, who've been prescribed a cocktail of drugs, none of which work for them, and yet when they use marijuana, life is all of a sudden livable again for them. So understanding the racist history of the criminalization of marijuana in the first place, associated with Hispanics and African Americans across this country. And in fact, When we federally outlawed it in the 1930s, the one interest group to speak up against criminalization was the American Medical Association, because they could find no scientific or medical basis for criminalizing it. And yet today, 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. We are the most incarcerated nation on the planet. So many there, people of color, arrested for nonviolent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana. So for all of those reasons, let's not only end the criminalization, let's end the federal prohibition, let's expunge the arrest records of those serving time or who have served time for those adults in this country who could benefit from its use medicinally or in those states that decided to make it available recreationally. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Tengo el gran privilegio de ser tercera y mis hijos cuarta generación mexicoamericanos. But the immigration situation is very important and very dear to me because I have taken a family from Honduras into my home that has been seeking asylum, and because of the changes that Trump has recently made to the asylum requirements, I am afraid that that's going to change for them and they will have to leave, and that is something that is very, very hurtful to me and my family who have grown to love these people. What are you planning to do as far as the changes for asylum seekers?
First of all, thank you for what you're doing. And again, another example for this country of who we are. Couple of thoughts. One, we will never criminalize anybody seeking asylum or refuge in this country. That means we don't take their kids from them. We don't send the parents back and keep the kids in a cage. We don't put the kids in foster care in the United States against the will of the parents, which happens in some cases. We reunite all those families. We never detain them again. We institute something called a family case management program so that to the benefit of their dignity and at 1/10 of the cost of locking them up, we can make sure that we focus on their well-being and their ability, if they stay in this country, to thrive, and by extension, to help our country thrive. We will end a policy that you're probably aware of called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. And what that means is that when somebody applies for asylum in this country, from Ciudad Juarez to El Paso at our port of entry, they are forced to remain in place in Juarez. There are now close to casi 15,000 people in the albergues, or the shelters in Ciudad Juarez, one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico. Penniless, defenseless, no friends, not from that community or that country, and they are subject to kidnap, to rape, to being murdered there. It is a really dangerous situation for them, and in my belief, it is against the law in the United States. We should allow them to process their asylum applications here. As president, I will do that. No walls, no cages, and in going to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and investing in the solutions that will reduce crime and address climate change. And the gentleman in the back is right, every single one of these issues is connected. And if we think 400,000 apprehensions at our southern border last year was a problem, when Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador no longer support human life, and on this trajectory they will not, those numbers will pale in comparison. We work on the larger issues that are connected to this, and as I mentioned earlier, we rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image to legalize the presence of people who are contributing to our success. And then this country, in addition to those asylum-seeking families, is a stronger, is a better, and also a safer place. So thank you for offering us the example through your leadership, and I want to make sure that the country resembles that in our administration. Thank you very much.
I went to during Ernest Town Hall meeting on Saturday, and I'm worried about the campaign funds that the people get right for the NRA. What are your opinions on maybe not having senators as lobbyists?
Yeah. I think that, I hope that, and it feels like, that the power of the NRA is waning right now in America. energy was not with the NRA. The energy was not with Joni Ernst. The energy was with you. And the reason that I saw that video, as I was traveling in Mississippi or Arkansas or wherever we were when that came up on my feed, was because it really resonated. And it feels like what people are seeing in their communities as well. We were in a fairly conservative community called Conway in Arkansas this weekend. And I walked into a gun show. And I gotta tell you, I was a little apprehensive. The day before, I had just proposed a policy to buy all of the outstanding AR-15s, AK-47s, weapons of war that are out there in this country. Not necessarily the most politically popular position, definitely not at a gun show. To my surprise, as I'm walking in, a little apprehensive, am I in the right place? This gentleman walks up to me and he says, "You're Beto O'Rourke." And he strikes up a conversation, and I said, I gotta be honest with you, part of the reason I'm here is because we lose 40,000 people to gun violence every year. And I wanna make sure that I understand the solutions, but I also wanna talk to people who are involved in the business and in the industry. Tell me what you think. And this was his answer. He said, I should not be allowed to sell guns at this show. Because I'm not required to issue or conduct a background check. If you're 18 years old and you can prove it and you have a pulse, I have to sell you this weapon. That's wrong. Even though this guy is profiting from the current system, he knows the current system is wrong. Another guy who vehemently, but thankfully does not violently disagree with me on AR-15s and AK-47 says, look, I've got 3 kids. They're about to start school as well. I'm just as concerned as you are, Beto, about their safety. I don't know that stopping the sales of AR-15s is going to do it, but I'm willing to have the conversation. Another gentleman, Trump voter, said, you know what, if it's going to make this country safer to give back my AK-47, then let's do it. And the lesson to me is we shouldn't presume, based on party affiliation or who you voted for or where you live, how you feel about this issue. You care just as much about the safety and well-being of your kids. You're just as shocked that someone can walk into a Walmart or a synagogue or a church or a high school or an elementary school and kill people with that weapon of war. So let's at this moment reach out to one another, bring everyone in to that conversation and surprise ourselves with the fact that a majority of this country wants to do the right thing. They're just waiting for the political leadership that will reflect that. So not the NRA, but all of us. Thank you.
Approaching at all, and that has to do with billing. I've been very fortunate, my oldest son is right here, and I also have a 12-year-old, and some in between, and I've always been fortunate to have insurance. But I've had times that the hospitals have overbilled. I even had a time that insurance overpaid by $400, and they still got an $845 bill. I have an elderly father that, I went to this college, and my sister is educated, my brother's educated. We can't figure out my father's bills, and neither can the billing people that we're calling, and the bills are astronomical, and he's insured. So until these corporate companies are required to send sensible billing, it doesn't matter what insurance you do.
Right. Or the surprise billing when you go to the emergency room and they refer you to a specialist without your knowledge, and that specialist is out of network, and you pay the full freight on that. Unfortunately, not an isolated incident in this country. It's happening all over the place. Some people, even under the Affordable Care Act, and I've got to think unwittingly on the part of President Obama and Speaker Pelosi, have made out like bandits in terms of the ability to bill medically. Other people, most importantly the patients, are routinely shafted in this system. And surprisingly for me, and for the doctors and medical providers in the room, it won't be a surprise for you, but also in many cases for the doctors. I got a call from one of the most conservative doctors that I know in El Paso who hated the Affordable Care Act, called it socialism. And he said, Beto, I hope you're sitting down, because I got to tell you, I think I like your plan, Medicare for America, which is guaranteed universal health care for everyone. And I'll tell you why. He said, I spend the majority of my day fighting insurance companies, filling out paperwork, negotiating with them instead of seeing my patients. The reason I went to medical school, the reason I answered this call was to deliver care to the people in this community, and I'm functionally prevented from doing that under this current system. If we can simplify things through the system that I described earlier, allow those doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners to focus on providing care to their patients, allow the patient to focus on getting well, allow the family to focus on thriving, we're going to be such a stronger country for it. So whether it's the pharmaceutical benefits managers, whether it is these corporate hospital chains, whether it is the insurance companies themselves who have an overhead of 16, 17, 18% and are making outstanding profits right now, we have to make sure that the focus and the money returns to people and the delivery of care, and under our system we'll be able to do that. Thanks for bringing this up. Really appreciate it.
And I'm really sorry if I didn't get to you. This is going to be our last question.
It's not a question. I just want to thank you for doing all that you do in El Paso. Since
Thank you very much. Thank you all for welcoming us back to Iowa. Honored to be back with you. We're going to hang out for a little bit for anyone who would like to say hello. Love to shake your hand. Anybody who wants to grab a photo. But it's an honor to be back, and we'll see you down the road. Gracias, everybody.